Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learn Plus. I'm Brenda Bailey Hughes, your facilitator of the Learn Plus Live, a monthly show here at LinkedIn that teaches one new skill plus a tip for facilitators or learning and development professionals or coaches who then may have to take that skill and teach it to others. I'm so delighted that you're here. As you log in, let us know where you're coming in from today. I am in the Midwest of the United States, a little town called Bloomington in Indiana. I'm about 4 hours south of Chicago. This is a university town where I taught at Indiana University in the Kelley School of Business for about 23 years before my very recent May 31st retirement to allow me more time to engage in conversations like this with amazing learners like yourselves, as well as time to do deeper dives into some of the learning areas that I'm intrigued by, some deeper research, and some development of new courses. One of which I just filmed in LinkedIn. I was out in Carpinteria, California at the LinkedIn studios. So watch for more information on my LinkedIn feed about that new class. I think it'll probably come out hopefully in August, and I'll give you lots of information about that communication course as we get nearer to the release date. So that's where I'm from. That's who I am. And I'm so delighted that you are here today. I'm going to introduce you to my guest, but just a little, I'm going to try to tell the story. And then when he gets here, he can tell me if I've messed this up. But I'm pretty sure that our story of meeting is one of those wonderful stories about the value of reciprocity, because when I first met Param, he had, I think, seen some of my LinkedIn live courses and then reached out to me. One of his many hats that he wears is connecting trainers to his corporate clients to help with coaching and training needs. And so he connected me with a client and facilitated the work that I did with this particular group. So that was nice. But then as I got to know him through this engagement, I find out that he has a daughter who was looking for colleges at the time. And I said, well, hey, I teach at a great business school. If she's interested in business, let her know about Indiana. And, oh, no, I'm pretty sure she's going to, stay out here on the East Coast. I'm, oh, okay, I get it. Well, nope, sure enough, his daughter ended up choosing the business school where I taught. And not only did she choose the school, she ended up in my business presentations course, which the chances of that are, we have thousands of incoming first year students, and I teach a very small course. So it almost felt like it was meant to be that I had his daughter in class. And then to come full circle, this started him reaching out to me to help with training. And now look, now I'm reaching out to him to say, hey, I've seen some of your work on storytelling and communicating organizational values through story. Can you help me out and share your information with some of my learners? So reciprocity, networking, all of those things are, I think, beautifully exemplified by this relationship that I have with Param Venkat, who I said earlier is out of New Jersey, New York. He does corporate training. He is a keynote speaker. He facilitates training, does some executive coaching, and through it all is a master storyteller. So I welcome to LinkedIn Learn Plus. Here's our visitor. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Brenda. How are you? Good to see you, and thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. I'm so glad that you're here. Did I get our story somewhat straight? Is that how you remember it, or have
No,
I missed chunks?
absolutely reciprocity, and I'm glad that it all worked out well, and we are here today
Me
to tell
too.
some stories and share some learnings.
Yes, exactly. Well, so I saw on your LinkedIn site, you talk about what you believe in, which is the beginning of an organizational values. What do you believe? And I saw that you wrote stories, not statements. Stick with your audience. Stories, not statements. Stick with your audience. I love that phrase. Can you tell me how you came to believe that? What's the thinking behind that?
Absolutely. So it's been about 12 years since I've been doing coaching and training. A year after I had delivered few training programs, I thought it's a good time to go and ask the participants, the clients, what are their learnings? Are they even applying what I taught them? So I asked a lot of questions. One of the questions I asked was, what do you remember from whatever I taught you? And interestingly, Brenda, 100% of them responded saying, "Oh, we remember the stories you told us. We remember the story of the big deal you lost at a bank, or a big deal that you won in a consumer products company. We remember your first time fishing story in Rhode Island." And I was thinking to myself, I had really worked hard to put together a very good workbook with tools, frameworks, a lot of stuff. But what they remembered is the stories. And that's when I realized storytelling has to be a part of the body of the work I do.
Yeah.
And so, one more thing I want to share with the audience is that the statements are important, your tools and frameworks are important, but it's important to support it with a story. So, for example, if you want to give a pill to a puppy, you have a puppy at home, what we do is we wrap the pill in a piece of cheese and give it to our puppy so that she eats it and she, in fact, asks for more. So you have to use your data, fact statements. The only thing I'm saying is wrap it in a piece of cheese, and that piece of cheese in this case is story. So wrap your facts, data, statements, bullets that you put on PowerPoint, but wrap it in a story and offer it to your audience. The chances your message will stick with your audience is going to be much, much better when you do it that way. So that's the reason I say that, statements and not are not that effective, but when you communicate stories, that's when it really sticks. But so that's the reason I have stories, and not statements are more important. So I don't know if Brenda is not there, but I'll continue to make one more point to our audience, is that there was a research, an experiment done in Stanford by Dr. Jennifer Eicher. She's a professor. What she did is that she asked 10 of her students to create a 1 to 2 minute presentation. They came back, they presented, and then she went back to the audience to ask, what do you remember from these presentations? And interestingly, 9 out of the 10 presentations had a lot of bullets and texts and graphs, which many of us use. They could not recall big part of the presentation. But one presentation had a personal story, and everyone was able to recall that story. That's when she concluded that stories are about 22 times more memorable compared to just mere statements and bullets.
Did you say 22 times?
22 times more memorable.
Wow.
In fact,
Wow.
another research that shows that people forget almost 50% of what you present by the time you leave the room,
Oh my gosh.
and almost 80 to 100% in about 72 hours,
Oh,
unless you give them something that sticks with them.
oh
That's
my
why,
goodness. Well,
stories.
I've had similar experiences where I've told stories, but that were, to me, I thought sort of an aside or just a supplement, a way to sort of, it was the cheese. It was definitely not the pill. I'm remembering being with it was a group of educators. And my real point was that frequently high performing students, like gifted and talented students, are often overlooked. That was the pill that I was trying to help them understand, so that they would be a little more aware or cognizant of their students. And then the story that I tell wasn't even about an education. It wasn't even about a classroom. It was about my sister when she got married, and I gave her a gift, and then later I go to help her clean out the house, and I find this gift unopened and shoved in a closet with the rummage, the stuff that she's like, take that to the Goodwill, take that to the thrift store, I'm done with it. And so it was a metaphorical story. It wasn't even a literal story on the topic. And yet this was a educational conference that met every year, and I was on the circuit for every other year. So 2 years later, when I'm back, people would rock up and say, has your sister given anything away again?
Yeah.
Like that's the piece that they grabbed hold of. It just cracks me up.
Exactly. So that's the reason. In fact, I remember when diversity inclusion was gaining momentum, a lot of people, including me, were not clear about what is the difference between diversity and inclusion, right? And then one quote I read by the DEI expert Varna Myers, where she said, diversity is like inviting someone to a party, whereas inclusiveness is when you actually ask them to come to the dance floor. Or in fact, ask them to be part of the organizing committee. Now, I'm going to put you on a spot, Brenda. You posted something on LinkedIn last week about allyship.
Yeah.
When I ask someone what is allyship, usually people respond with statements saying it means standing for the others, supporting, advocating, encouraging, being there for your colleagues. What you did is you did all of those, but you supported it with one of your personal story. Would you mind sharing that story?
Oh, no, I'd love to share that story. So, years ago, when my kids were little, I was working a full time training and OD consultant role and decided I really needed to sort of back off and be part time. So, I went to my director and said, can we make this a half-time position and then a job sharing role where you put me with someone else? And she was very supportive, but said there's no way the other directors are going to go for this. This was 30 years ago. All of the other directors were men. I'm pretty sure they all had um, wives at home that were taking care of their children. So they weren't experiencing this harried, hectic lifestyle that I was. But she said, I'll try. So she's ally number one because she wanted to try. But she goes into this meeting with all these directors and they, I don't know how it's going, but she relayed to me that there was one of those directors, his name was Paul Sullivan. I hadn't even worked with him really closely. Our work had been just somewhat tangential. And he apparently, as it was kind of a no, we don't really do job sharing. We don't even understand what that would look like. We can't imagine it for a role that's client facing like this one is. She was getting a lot of pushback. And then finally Paul said, wait a minute. Um, I think that having a halftime BBH, my nickname, is better than a full-time unknown. We need to support our working women. Let's do this. And so they did. They said yes. And the end of that story, which I don't think I even shared in that post, was that was at Indiana University. So I went on for another, well, I was in that role for another 6 years and then at IU for another 23 years. Like they got a 30-year loyal employee out of that decision. And I would have quit if they'd said no to the halftime role. I would have found a different role at a different organization where I could have been part-time. But it also, you're going to love this part, Param, because I went part-time and they had to find my other half. My other half was Tatiana Kolovu, who then has also gone on to be a loyal and amazing employee of the organization. And she and I have taught courses together. You know her through the work that she and I do together. I would never have met Tatiana. You would not have met Tatiana if they hadn't engaged in this job sharing piece that was so radical at the time. But I think it's a good example. Thanks for reminding of it, of how we can share a value when we say allyship and nobody even knows what we're talking about. How can we actually share that? Wrap it in the cheese, put the pill in the cheese. Not that allyship is a pill, but it's the thing we're really trying to get into people, put it in a story, and now maybe it means something. Organizational values are certainly one place where we want to share stories. Are there I know Paul Smith wrote a book about the 10 stories that leaders should tell, and it had things like we should have a story ready to explain our founding story, like how did our organization come to be, and we should have a story for recruiting. Why should you come work for us? And we should have a story ready to tell our leadership philosophy. We should have stories ready to tell to make a change case, like why we cannot stay here. And then another story to say the vision story of here's where we should go. And maybe yet another story to say, here's how we're going to get from where we are to where we need to go. So he gives us these different types of stories. I'm curious, aside from organizational values, when do you use these, or training? We've talked about training a little bit. You mentioned a first time fishing story. What was the context for that one? Or what other topics demand a good story?
Yeah, so good question. So, there are all, you in fact listed out a lot of the opportunities where you could tell story. I think Jay had commented about, being able to relate and with the audience, etc. Personal story, a connection story is, I think, one of the most powerful and one of the first stories that you can share to help build rapport with your audience or with whoever you're talking to. Because Stories are the shortest distance between the two people. If you want to reduce the distance between you and someone else, just share a story. Share a story about you and then stop and say, enough about me. What about you, Brenda? And a good chance you're going to come back with your own story, because storytelling is not about, it's not a one-way street. It's a conversation. So you want the way we are doing right now. So personal connection story, I think, is one of the most powerful story. So usually I use the story of fishing when I'm doing my sales training, and and telling them that, hey, sales is about resilience. It's about patience. And that's what happened to me when the first time when I went to fish. It took me about 3 hours to catch the first fish in the back in Rhode Island. And once the I caught the fish, I was excited. My buddy Jack says, no, you got to drop it back, because the rules of the waters are that you need to be at least 20, the fish has to be 28-inch minimum length. And that's what happens in sales. You do a lot of work, you feel that you won the deal, and last minute you feel that you need to drop the deal or something happens, right? So the key is you need to be able to make a business point out of a personal story. That's very critical. So that's one. Second is the company story that you talked about, a foundation story or a capability story. You should definitely have some story to connect. We're going to talk about value story as we check along. Success story. Success story is about your client.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very critical. And one of the mistakes a lot of people do when they are sharing success stories is that they always talk about themselves. They make themselves the hero of the story. You are not the hero of the story. If you watch Star Wars, you are not Luke Skywalker. You are Yoda. You are the guide. You're just going to help the other client understand how you were able to make another client successful. So that's another way. You talked about change. I think that's a big one. If there is anyone in the audience from change management and strategy, companies are very good in creating a strategy, creating a change, but they are not that good in communicating it, because many times they create this 40-50 slider presentation. So I'll share a little example. There was a CEO of a bank, of a large bank. They had come up with a new change strategy, and it was time to communicate to the rest of the organization. So he called all the senior executives to the boardroom, and he asked, so now that we are ready, what's the next step? So one of the executives said, oh, we are going to send this 40 slider to our teams. Our teams will further forward it to their teams. And by the end of the week, everybody in the organization will have our change strategy. We might do 1 or 2 road shows. And the CEO said, no, hold on. One of the values or one of the things we say is we need to show people that we are adopting the change first, because adoption of change is the biggest challenge. So he went on to tell a little story. He said, over the weekend, I was driving with my 17-year-old son. I was sitting in the passenger seat. We came to the traffic light. The light turned orange, and my son gave the indicator and took a left. And I told my son, that's not the way to do. You have to give the indicator at least 10 seconds before the light turns. And my son said, you never do that, Dad. You, in fact, give the indicator right when you're taking a left, or sometimes you don't even give an indicator. He told this story to his executives saying, if we are telling something, we better be following that ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
So unless you pack some stories when you're communicating a strategy, the chances are your strategy and change will not stick. And people will, if you push, you're going to get a pushback. But when you share using a story, you're creating a pull. That is where you can use stories. So sales, leadership, culture, strategy, communicating data, personal stories, value stories. These are the places that you can use stories.
Yeah. By the way, in August, I'm going to focus my live on communicating with data. I've been saying I was going to do that for months, and then I keep pushing it back and pushing it back. So I'm making a public proclamation so that I cannot push back past August. But I think your point is well made, that stories, even when data are the characters, evidence and statistics are part of the characters, there's still a story wrap there. We still need to put the pill in the cheese. I'm loving that metaphor. That really works for me. Colleen has commented that Colleen, sounds like you've been through some change management initiatives because you recognize that value of storytelling, and that it's So true. So
Yes,
true.
one more comment about personal story. One of the mistakes many of the leaders do when you go to introduce yourself, let's say you're introducing yourself to a client or you're in a town hall, a lot of the people start off by telling their titles. I'm the vice president and I have so many people reporting to me. I'm responsible. Don't read out your resume. Tell a
Mm.
little story about you. 20 years back, when I started my career in sales or when I joined this company, I knew nothing. And go on, let the audience figure out from your story that who you are, how long you've been in the company, what's your character, because your story will reveal so much about you that you will never have to read your resume to people.
Yeah, I think that's so true. When people hear about the 30-second elevator pitch, whether that pitch is about an idea that you're trying to get your company to adopt, or whether it's about you if you're in a job transition phase of your life, that 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 pitch is really a story when it's good. If it's just that recitation of the facts, if it's a recitation of your resume, as you said, nobody remembers that. A story, well, they remember it 22 times more than they do the other pieces. So if you want to stand out, and have that audience 22 times more likely to remember why your idea is a great idea, why you as a hire or a promotion is a great idea, story, that's the key. I love it.
Absolutely.
We promised we would do a deeper dive into communicating organizational values specific. We've had lots of use cases for stories, but that one I found particularly intriguing. I was wondering if you could talk about how you came to see that connection and maybe give us an example or two of stories that bring organizational values to light. I think we could use these if any of us do new employee orientation, if we are just trying to get other colleagues to really buy into our organizational values. It seems like we've got to bring them to life.
No, absolutely. I think to communicate values, especially stories, I found it to be very, very powerful. So, you know, when I used to walk into these corporate headquarters, to do training programs, always I'll see these values statements hanging in the wall: integrity, responsibility, leading with example, customer first,
Inclusivity.
inclusivity, and whatnot. And then I'll go to the conference room where the training is happening. The leaders have come, everybody's settled down. The first thing I'll ask is, who can tell me what are your company values? And believe it or not, many cannot recall at all. And some would recall and they'll say, oh, responsibility or inclusivity or integrity. And then I'll ask my next question: explain to me what it means. What do you usually get is statements. Oh, we
Uh,
are one team. One team means collaboration, we work together. But that's everybody says that. Give me more. You tell me a story, and they struggle. They really
um,
struggle. And that's when I make them tell me one story about one team that can really, because you have to live the values. Otherwise, those values are like a talisman hanging on the wall as if to ward off some evils, right? Yeah, otherwise those values have no meaning at all. So to share a couple of stories, this is from the Mars Wrigley's, the company that makes Wrigley's, M&Ms,
okay.
Milky Ways, all the stuff that we love to eat. So the John Mars, the chairman, was visiting a factory in a rural area. And this story I heard from my partners, Mark and Sean, as they do a lot of work with them. And one of the leaders had shared the story. So John Mars walks into the factory. It was a day full of presentations. So they go into the boardroom or conference room. All the executives are sitting. And one by one, the executives are coming in, presenting. Suddenly, there is a fluorescent bulb on the ceiling that starts to flicker. And it is annoying. It is distracting everyone from the presentation, but nobody is doing anything. John Moss gets up from the seat, walks out, brings a step ladder, goes up, removes the bulb, puts the ladder back, and sits, and the presentation continues. One of the values is responsibility. You see something, you do something. And this story went not only viral, this is how you build culture in a company. It has to come from the top. And the whole organization clearly understood what responsibility means using this story. In fact, one more thing happened. There one more value is quality. And in another factory where they were making pet food, a glass shattered and and glass pieces were it shattered, and there's all over the pet can foods. So they were thinking, it's a can. Should we just, clean it up and we could still, ship it out? But one of the executives said, no, no, quality is an important value for us. So we should not be doing. So they actually trashed about million cans, and because this was one of the value, and that story went viral as well. That also reinforces the employees that my company I work is got high integrity. There's a sense of belongingness, and that's how you build cultures. So there's one more story if I could share.
Please.
This called a bags fly free. After 2008, when the markets crashed, many companies were not doing well, and the airline industry was not doing well as well. So Southwest Airlines called they hired consultants, and they asked the consultants and the finance team, go back and figure out how we can increase our revenues and reduce our cost. They came back with a solution. They presented saying that let's start charging for the checked-in bags. Some of the other airlines that's already started doing it. We can increase our revenues by about 350 million.
Okay.
The executives came back and said, no, we're not doing that, because one of our values is we are going to democratize the skies, and we are going to take care of our customers. So instead of doing that, they hired a PR branding expert named Roy Spence, and he came out with a campaign called Bags Fly Free. Exactly opposite of what the consultants are told. Guess what? Within 12 to 18 months, they raked up about $1 billion more in revenues, and the market share went up, and it's just amazing. So a research was done wherein they found out that S&P 500 companies who actually live by the values, who have a good culture, they are not toxic, end up doing very well over a period of time in the S&P 500 index. And once they don't live by the values, don't build the culture, actually you can see. So there is a correlation sort of between the financials and the values. So don't underestimate the power of values is what I'm trying to say here.
Oh, yeah. So two great points here, I think, to reiterate that this idea that values cannot just be on the hallway signage. I noticed Anna mentioned that she's had these 5 value statements with one sentence each for years, and a couple of years, and that's kind of where it stopped, was one sentence each. But if you could turn those into stories, can you imagine how those would come to life? So that being one of the points is that stories will bring them to life instead of just being statements. And then that underestimating the power of those values to drive the culture and the rapport and the connection, but also some of those bottom line results that we're affecting even our profit centers when we look at
absolutely.
Values in a serious way.
Absolutely. I also, there's a personal story. Back in 2019, I and my partner Mark Shank, we went to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and it was a 2-day training program. After day 1, we were relaxing. We were staying in the Hilton Sao Paulo, and we decided to have some food. So our waiter Alto came and gave us the menu. I was quick. I said, I'm going to have a vegetarian pizza. Mark, on the other hand, wanted to have a pizza, but he said, I need anchovies on my pizza. And Alto said, sir, let me go and check. He came back within few minutes and he said, sir, we don't have anchovies. I'm really sorry. Can you order something else? So Mark was a little disappointed, but he said, okay, let me check. 10 minutes passed by and Alto did not return. So we were getting a little annoyed. Then Alto came back, and this is what he told us. He said, sir, sorry for being late. I was actually trying to check if any of the nearby restaurants have anchovies or any of the stores close by anchovies, if we can source somehow for you. What happened there is that we were blown away by Alto's customer focus, which is the value. And he was going beyond to figure out how to keep the customer happy. Now, this will be a great story for Hilton if they decide to use. So, hello, Hilton. This is a great story. If you want to use this story inside your company to talk about customer focus, Alto from Sao Paulo, Brazil did that to us. So, there is this stories happening every day in every company. And your employees are doing amazing things. It's about spotting those stories. It's about bringing it to life. It's about sharing it with everyone else. That's the way to build the culture.
Yeah, really interesting. I want to. I see one of a question here that I want to. Oh, where did it go? Um, yeah, Harish's question I want to get to here about how to manage this in their resume, and then we'll come back to. You've mentioned a couple of different places where you found these stories. Like, I love stories. I love the idea that they will drive a point. They will create change. They will help retention. They affect culture and so forth. But where do we find them? I want to circle back to that in a minute. Harish is asking, in a resume, do you believe a storyboard is useful? And if so, what area should one focus on? Should it be scripted to resonate with the hiring manager for the role at hand? So we'll both take a stab at this probably, but your second question is exactly where I was going to head, which is audience, audience, audience in the resume. So resume, if there's a cover letter-esque option, that's where I remember the days when people would go to a print shop and they'd print out hundreds of their resumes and start sending them out by snail mail to everyone. Or even now when we go to these job sites and one generic resume goes out to tons of different employers. And I'm really squeamish about that. I love the efficiency of it, but I do worry that it doesn't allow us to tailor to the audience. And I think if you do know the hiring manager at hand, Harish, thinking about what keeps that manager awake at night, what are that manager's pain points, and if your story can then address that pain point, I think that's the story for you to tell. How do your skill sets and your experiences and a story that of something you've done connect into what's motivating most to this hiring manager? I think that's a good secret sauce. Param, what would you add for Harish to think about?
No, absolutely. To Harish's question, yes, obviously, as I said, people put a lot of the information, data, facts, because the attention of a reader for a resume is very, very low, right? First few seconds, if it's not exciting enough. So I would say that, yes, like Brenda said, knowing who the hiring manager and tailoring, and if you could pop in something, if you've seen that they're part of some group or if you have some intelligence on them. Robert Cialdini had written a book called Influence, where he talked about that people tend to hire people who are like them or who they connect with well. And in a social circle, we all do that. We tend to go towards a group where we feel comfortable. So, yes, the answer is that if someone feels that they are able to connect with them at some level, maybe they're going to, have something similar to talk about, the chances are that, you have better chance of getting hired. I was coaching someone and I asked, tell me a little story or share something personal. So he had it in his resume actually. He said that one of my strengths is that I can be very comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. And he went on to write in the resume that, for example, when I was in university, I was asked by my professor to be a companion to a student who's blind and, teach him. We spent next 30 days with him to teach him linear algebra because I was very good at it. And that prompted in the interview. Now, you can't write everything in the resume. In the interview, the first question the interviewer hiring manager asked is, what's that story? Right? And he went on to tell that, it was interesting. I didn't know how to. I couldn't even, communicate well. I didn't know. I had to bring threads from my home to draw a triangle and making visualize and all those things. So the answer is yes, you can, but you cannot obviously write a too long a story. But give them something that will make them ask you that question in their interview. That's what, give them a teaser is what I would say to Harish.
Yeah, absolutely. Nata was pointing that out too, that you're going to get to narrate that situation in the interview. And maybe we can get that interview if we've given enough of a teaser in the resume to get people in. I didn't even remember doing this, but probably 15 years after he graduated, one of my former students reminded me that on the first day of class, I do some getting to know you activities, some rapport building activities to get some of the students up speaking. but I also start a story. I begin to tell a story, and the story is setting up another student and how this student learned the secret to great communication. And then right before the time for class ends, I go, oh, we're out of time. I'll finish this story next week, or when I see you on Thursday, or the next day we have class. 15 years later, he said, I still remember that I was like dying to come back to class. Most first year students do not say they are eager to come back to a business presentations course, but that, like you said, Param, that hook that got him interested, then gave him back, got him back in. So love
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Harish, I hope that was helpful, and would love to see your story. So tag either one of me or Param, send us a LinkedIn message with your story that you're thinking about including in your resume. We can give you some quick feedback. Love that. Hamdi says that she's worked with, I have worked with values that are the quality assurance departments. That's the only time we talk about them. So you've all had that experience
Yeah,
of the values really not coming
I
very,
mean,
very
true.
much
Yeah.
to life.
In fact,
But stories are the way. So maybe, and if responsibility is one of your personal goals, or bringing added value to your organization, maybe you can start looking for those stories so that you are the storyteller of your corporate values. Where do we find the stories, Param?
yeah. So start building a story bank. Usually we are very good in listening to stories during Thanksgiving dinner, or in our family rooms, or sitting in a restaurant. But when it comes to business, somewhere I see that the passion with which we tell show stories in an informal environment, it doesn't come. I'm saying break that. Start
Mm,
sharing personal stories in a business environment, as long as it makes a business point. Obviously, it has to make a point. So don't tell a story if it doesn't make a business point. So first is your own stories, your personal stories. So you need to start documenting those stories. So just go back to your memory lane, or you hear something. Second is the stories that you heard today. You could use my story,
yeah.
as long as you give credit. You just say that, hey, I heard this story from Param, who was talking about his experience in Sao Paulo, or Brenda about her allyship. Give the credit, because you lose credibility if you make somebody else's story as your story.
Yeah.
Don't ever do that.
Yeah.
I know someone, I'll tell a story about that as well, someone who did that and he lost the credibility in no time. Third is other stories. You read stories in Wall Street Journal, or you see a story. Stories are like raindrops, Brenda. They are just dropping all around us. Just collect them in a bucket. So keep these three buckets: your stories, other stories, stories that you read, and use it when you can. So you need to have a story bank. From
Yes.
there, you can start using these stories. So one of the things, obviously, for if any of you are from the change management or HR or culture, you could do a little experiment. You could ask your team to pick one of the values and ask them to share a few stories by email, and then get together another week and just lunch and learn. Hey, Mary, you told about a story, can you tell us?
Oh, I love that.
So I think that is another way to sort of do that. In fact, I've heard that in Apple stores, every morning the supervisor comes and they all come together, and then they stand in a circle. And instead of asking what's the plan for the day, he will ask, hey, Mary or Shelby, I saw you were spending a lot of time yesterday beyond 7 o'clock when we closed the store, and the customers seemed happy. What happened? Mary tells a story, right? Steve Wynn, who is the founder of the Wynn Hotels, he has done a video where he talks about how powerfully they use stories. So he says that in our hotel, early morning, the supervisor, before the shift starts, gets all the staff together, and the first thing he or she does is, anything happened yesterday? Anything interesting happened? And someone will raise a hand and say that, yeah, from the housekeeping will raise a hand and say, oh yeah, I saw a lady entering the room, and she dropped her credit card. I knocked the door and I gave her the card, and she gave me a big tip.
Oh,
Customer value, customer focused story.
right. Right.
Stories are everywhere. You just have to keep your eyes and ears open, collect them, and use them in a relevant situation.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that they're raindrops that we catch in a bucket. We might make our bucket an Excel sheet instead. I know
Yes,
that Microsoft keeps a story
that's what I
bank
do.
that literally is an Excel sheet that kind of has in one column when the types of reasons you would use it, another column with a brief description of the story, a third column of whose story we credit, who gets credit
Yes.
for this story, and then that way you have lots of stories to pull from that otherwise might you might lose those raindrops along the way. But I love that idea of a story bank or a story bucket to
Story
keep
bucket,
all
yeah.
these great
I put
stories.
it on my Apple Notes and I hashtag it, hashtag value story, collaboration story,
Love it.
you know.
Although putting them in a bank, I mean, there obviously are written stories. That's what great novels and books and plays are all about. I think there is something particularly intriguing about the oral tradition of stories that I don't know if there's been research on that. That'd be interesting whether we retain oral stories better or worse than we retain written stories. But I do think it would behoove all of us to practice our storytelling. Would love to start wrapping up today with your best tips for telling a good story. What are some of the ways you're a master at this? Your stories
Ah, no, no.
amaze me. I remembered them. I love them. But how do you get us there? How did you learn? What are tips for being a great storyteller for those who want to improve their storytelling, or if they are teaching others to be great storytellers? How can they do that?
So, one of the first tip I'm going to share is actually very contradicting to what we did today, which is we use the story a lot. Is till you become a master storyteller, you may want to be careful telling, "Oh, I'm going to tell you a story." Many
Mm,
a times when you say, "Hey, I'm going to tell you a story," people can start thinking, "Oh, is it going to take a long time? Is it, I don't have time for it," especially in a business environment. Instead, straight dive into the story. Just say, "Hey, Brenda, over the weekend I was in Home Depot with my daughter and something happened."
love that.
Get into the story. You don't have to really give a lot of. So that's tip number one.
Okay.
And tip number two is that, you know, I would say that uh, always start with the time and place in a story, because people can connect with time and place even if they if you even if you've not been to a place. Let's say that if I tell a story about, hey, over the weekend I was in Times Square and I was walking, even though you were not there or if you're not gone, you can relate to a place. So time and place and characters important to bring, who you were with, who you were walking when you were in 10th grade when a big storm came, or stuff like that. So time and place, character, some surprise element, right? And make some business point. So that sort of is a fundamental DNA of telling a story. Also, I would say that make it relevant, because if you tell a story from Wall Street to a bunch of coal miners in West Virginia, it's not going to land on them well. So
Yeah.
that's why what you said, knowing your audience is very critical. So don't be very, and that's where the culture comes itself. Don't. I remember putting a Modern Family video to a bunch of audience in Singapore, and they were not laughing. They were just confused. But a day before, the same video had worked great for the
Yeah.
American audience, right? So just be careful about doing that. And lastly, as I said, give credit to the stories. There was this gentleman. President of a chamber of commerce who was kickstarting a 3-day program, and he went and started off saying, "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I know how difficult it is. You come to spend time with us away from your family." And he said, "I was boarding a flight yesterday at the Dallas airport, and I saw maybe a girl, maybe 20, 19 or 20, crying, hugging her mom, and it looks like they were going to separate from each other for a long time. So I really get it. You all have come to spend time with us, separated from the family." As he was narrating that story, half of the crowd was nodding, "Yeah, such a great story." And some of them were looking at each other. "I've seen this story somewhere." This story had gone viral on Facebook, but he did the mistake of calling it his story.
Oh,
And you lose credibility
yeah.
immediately. So, quote people from where. So, this is another tip for telling stories is that, you know tell your personal stories from your story bank, give the credit to the right people, use time and place, character, And stories travel, so just be careful a little bit, do a little story test, because the stories that I've told here is traveling all over the world right now. And
Right.
so the stories that you tell, especially in the social media today's world, just do a little test, maybe tell it to someone else and see if this works well. That's how you go about doing storytelling. But I keep posting videos so people, audience can always share, see some of the things that we do.
Yeah, and speaking of which, as we wrap up, Shelby's going to bring up a QR code that you can scan that will take you directly to Param's LinkedIn site, and that's where you can find some of his great stories and new stories that are emerging, and what kind of uh, other tips and techniques that he has for master storytelling. I would love to thank you, Param, for sharing all this great information and your insights. It's always such a pleasure to swap stories with you, my friend. I love that.
Absolutely.
We add to the raindrop buckets out there. For listeners and learners that are here today, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope that you got some valuable tips about storytelling. We encourage you. I would love to see you take that action step of starting staff meetings or going to a meeting with a story around a value, or asking teammates to come with a story about a particular value. And maybe if you have 5 values, as at least some of us do, you circle through those and spend a week or two on one value and then circle through the next, and see if you can't start bringing those organizational values to life with great stories in your organizations. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Param, thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being
Thanks,
here.
everyone. Thanks, Brenda.
Take
And thanks,
care.
Sylvie.
I'll see you in August for Communicating with Data.